أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا واللعنة الدائمة الباقية على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون. صلوات عليك برا. Sisters and brothers in Iman, Salaam Alaikum. This happens to be the first Thursday of the month, where I normally come to the Masumin Islamic Center. And this is also the last Thursday and the last weekend before Ramadan. And so, yes, we know that people are, taking full advantage of the few days that they have. They can have their evenings free. During the last month of Ramadan, when I was here for the first 2 weeks, we started with the brief Tafsir of Surah Yasin. Unfortunately, we were not able to complete that during the 2 weeks that I was here, and so the idea was that inshallah we'll continue that on the first Thursdays of the month that I come here. And we did that. Interestingly, this is the last Thursday before Ramadan, and today is the last concluding day of that discussion on Surah Yasin. I don't want to do this again to keep it for the whole year. So inshallah I'll be coming here on Tuesday, the 1st of Ramadan, and I'll be with you till the 15th of that month. And of course, I don't want to announce what is the theme for this year, so you have to come on Tuesday to hear about it. Salawat. Just to connect with the previous discussions that we have, Surah Yasin basically consists of three fundamental, concepts in Islam, beginning with the concept of Risalat and Nabuwat, ayat number 1 to 32, and then we come to Tawheed, ayat 33 to 47, and then we ended with ayat 48 to 68, dealing with the issue of Qiyamah. And it's interesting the sequence of the theme. Didn't start with Tawheed and Nabuwat and Qiyamah, started with Nabuwat and then Tawheed and then Qiyamah. Because this is a surah which is in honor of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by talking about the message and the messenger before he talks about himself. Yasin wal Quran al Hakim innaka laminal mursaleen. So the Quran is there as a message, and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the messenger. Now we come to the summary, the last section of the Surah Yasin from 69 to 83, which I would like to conclude this evening. Basically, when we talk about the summary, is going back to, it's very, very much like, many of the books, the writers actually at the end, end by summarizing what they have discussed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, interestingly, in this surah does the same thing. As he talks about Nubuwwat and Tawheed and Qiyamah, and then he ends by summarizing the themes. And so the first one, this is ayat number 69, وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ وَمَا عَلَّمْنَاهُ الشِّعْرَ وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ. That we have not taught him poetry. وَمَا يَنبَغِي لَهُ, and it is not appropriate for him to compose poetry. It is nothing, إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا ذِكْرٌ وَقُرْآنٌ مُبِينٌ, that this book is nothing but a reminder and a plain Quran. Now, when we look at this, this is basically going back to the first theme of this surah, the message and the messenger. Because if you look at the challenge that Rasulullah had in Mecca, whenever he talked about Islam, when he talked about Allah and Qiyamah and Quran, the response of the Quraysh was to ridicule him, to reject him. And one of the things that they did was using these labels. And as I have said many, many times, we shouldn't be afraid of the labeling done against Muslims during the modern times. Of course, the means of communications have increased. News spreads all over the world in seconds. And so the impact is there. But the essence of labeling the enemies, the other, is nothing new. This is what happened even in Mecca. Initially, the strategy of the mushrikeen was to oppose this new movement known as Islam by labeling the Prophet in different ways. They started with the term Majnoon. So they will discredit him and say he's a lunatic. Don't listen to him. But when that didn't work, they changed the label, and now they came up with the second one, which is Sha'ir, that he is a poet. And then when that didn't work, they ended up with the third one, that is Sahir. Sahir means a sorcerer, somebody who will bewitch you. Don't listen to him. Now, this is where we see that when the issue of Sha'ir comes in, this label, this was actually in response to the Quran, where the Prophet was saying that the Quran is the divine revelation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to me. Whereas the mushrikeen was saying, no, it's not the divine revelation, this is his own production. And because some of the ayat had a rhythm at the end of the sentences, they said actually this is just sha'r and sha'iri. And this is where the label of sha'ir is now being used for Rasulullah to discredit the message. However, the reason why that label didn't work, because although the Arabs before Islam lived in the era that we classify as Jahiliyyah, and that's a discussion by itself. What do we mean by Jahiliyyah? Were they ignorant people, illiterate people? No, it has a different meaning there. Even though these were Arab of Jahiliyyah, but one of their expertise was poetry. Even now, if you want to study Arabic language and literature on an advanced level, one of the things that you have to do is, for example, go through the anthology of the poetry of the Arabs. And there you don't only read the poetry of the era of Islam, you actually have to go back to the poets of pre-Islamic era. There is a whole collection of poetry known as As-Sab'a Mu'allaqat. Every year, they used to have their trade fair. The Arabs will gather from every place, and one of the things that they used to do was, present their poetry. And the best poetry of the year was selected, and the poet was honored by putting his poetry to, it will be hung in the Kaaba. This is where, for 7 years this happened, and those 7 poems are known as 7, hanging poems, which are there even studied now by those who are expert of, Arabic literature. And so the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah knew, at least if they didn't know anything, they knew sha'r and sha'iri. They knew what is poetry. And so when Rasulullah used to recite the ayat of Quran, they knew that this is not poetry, because this is our expertise. We know what it is. And so this didn't work. And that level of sha'ir didn't, fit the Prophet. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يَنْبَغِي لَهُ. It's not that he doesn't have the ability. Abu Talib was a poet. Ali was a poet. Poetry is there in the family. But Rasulullah refrained. It was not appropriate for him just for the same reason. Because then the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah, the Mushrikeen, will say, see, he is a poet, and these are not words of Allah, this is his own creation. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds by saying, in huwa, that this is nothing. This Quran is nothing illa dhikrun wa Quranun mubin. This is as a book which appeals to your conscience. Dhikr means reminder. Means if you really go back to your pure conscience and read the Quran, Quran will remind you of what is haqq and what is the truth. And it is, Quran mubin. It is clear. Anybody who knows the language, for them the message would be quite clear. What is the purpose of this, this book? لِيُنْظِرَ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا وَيَحِقِّ الْقَوْلَ عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ, so that it may warn one who is alive, and so that the judgment may come true against the kafirin, the unbelievers. Now this is very interesting here because we're still in the first theme, summary of the first theme of the three themes of the surah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now talks about this issue of the mission and the purpose of the Quran. Why was it sent down? Two reasons have been mentioned in this ayat number 70. One is لِيُنْظِرْ. Yunzir means to warn. To warn those who are مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا, those who are alive. And as I say, and I don't mean to say we should stop that, or it is not recommended, we have, specified Surah Yasin to be recited when people die. And there is nothing wrong with that. But it's interesting that we recite for the sawab of those who are dead. But the surah itself says, my message is for those who are living. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't be doing this, you do that. The sawab will go there and the message will come to me and you. And that is the whole purpose. And this is where we have to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِيُنْظُرُ مَنْ كَانَ حَيًّا. Contrasting that with the issue that this book was sent so that would be an argument, final argument or itmam hujjat for the kafirin on the day of Qiyamah. That they will not say we didn't receive the message. When you contrast that with the other issue, those who are alive, this is basically a warning for them. And then the issue of kafirin is coming in. This is where we see some of the mufassirin say there is symbolism in the words here. Life is connected to iman, and death is connected to kufr. So you might have a person, a human being who is, disbeliever, although he's living, but as far as his heart is concerned, he is dead. And if you have a person who has iman, then he's alive. And this is where there is a statement from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali bin Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam, where he says, ponder on the Quran, tafaqahu. Reflect on the Quran. Why? Because this is Rabi'ul Quran. Because, when you, Rabi'ul Qalb, when you reflect on the Quran, this becomes like the spring season for your heart. Your heart becomes alive by pondering on the Quran. And so this is the first theme that we have in the conclusion of Surah Yasin, dealing with the Quran and Rasul. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the second theme, and that was the issue of Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used many ayat, signs of His power and glory. We saw in different surahs that we have done before, Surah Mulk, Surah Dukhan, as well as in Surah Yasin. Even in that section on Tawheed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala appeals to the signs which are there visible around us. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala singles out one more sign. that we should reflect about it, and this will bring us closer to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the ayat. أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا أَنَّا خَلَقْنَا لَهُم مِّمَّا عَمِلَتْ أَيْدِينَا أَنْعَامًا فَهُمْ لَهَا مَالِكُونَ وَضَلَّلْنَاهَا لَهُمْ فَمِنْهَا رُكُوبُهُمْ وَمِنْهَا يَأْكُلُونَ وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا مَنَافِعُ وَمَشَارِبُ أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ. Do they not see that we have created cattle for them out of what our hands have brought forth? So they are their masters, and we have made the cattle subservient to them, for them, and they are and for them is in them there's the means of riding, and from them they eat, and in these animals they have benefits and drinks. Will they not be grateful? أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically is now going to the second of the three themes of Surah Yasin in summary of this surah, and that is the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again going to one ayat, one sign of His power, His creative power, and that is the creation of An'am. An'am in general refers to these domestic animals that human beings use. The first thing he says basically, فَهُمْ لَهَا مَالِكُونَ, that they are the owners of these animals. They are the masters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Malikul Mulk, but He has allowed us to, own the animals on this earth. Number two, he says, وَظَلَّلْنَاهَ لَهُمْ, and we have made these cattle subservient. ظَلَّلَّ تَضْلِيل. They are dhalil, we are aziz. So they are subordinates, they basically follow us. And this is where we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created cattle in such a way that human beings have the ability of controlling them. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, one of the ways you benefit from minha rukubuhum. You use these cattle for your rukub, riding on it, for the means of transportation for yourself or your goods. وَمِنْهَا يَأْكُلُونَ, and you use that also or supply for your food. And this is in a very, very big way. I don't know what will happen to us if we don't have these animals, which supply food for us. Then number 5, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا مَنَافِعُ. They have many, many benefits in these animals. So it's not only, rukub, transportation and riding on it or carrying of the burden, and not only the issue of food, there are other benefits. You look at just the hide or the skin of the animal, it's used in all different ways. Whether it comes to the clothing or the belts of wallets or purses of the ladies, talk about shoes, you talk about tents in some parts of the world. Even the furniture that we have these days, you have these leather sofas in the car. Even the musk those days, the water bag that people used to travel with that to carry water for themselves. It all came from the hide and skin of the animals. And there are many, many other uses that we don't know about it. And this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا مَنَافِعُ, that they are manafi and benefits in the cattle and the animals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created. And then he says, وَمَشَارِبُ. Masharib basically refers to the milk. And this is also interesting. Sometimes we don't think about it, that the milk itself is a full meal in a way, as far as the benefits that people can derive by drinking milk. You could probably survive with bread and milk, or khurma and milk, for example. But if you look at it, there are so many other things. Whether it is the cheese that you eat, or the butter that you get, the cream that you eat, all these other things, you talk about yogurt, You talk about your ice cream and many kinds of, delicious desserts and this and that. Everything, is in a way connected to milk. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا مَنَافِعْ وَمَشَارِبْ, that in these animals that I've created for you, you have benefits, various, benefits, as well as masharib, different kinds of drinks which come from there. أَفَلَا يَشْكُرُونَ, will they not be grateful after seeing all these things? So just one example, just of the an'am, the cattle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, think about it, and this is where you will be able to see my ayat and sign and of glory and power and the grace that I have for you. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार और. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now refers to the reaction of the mushrikeen. In spite of saying all these things, they still don't worship Him, they are not grateful to Him. Rather what they do, وَاتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ آلِهَةً لَعَلَّهُمْ يُنصَرُونَ, they have taken gods besides Allah, hoping that these gods will help them. لَا يَسْتَطِعُونَ نَصْرَهُمْ, these idols will not be able to help them. وَهُمْ لَهُمْ جُنْدٌ مُحْضَرُونَ, and these mushrikeen who worship these idols, they will be presented, they will be gathered in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hum lahum jundun, as an army of the idols. You worship them, I'm going to punish you as the army of the idols. And this is where we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically talking about the reaction of the mushrikeen to the message of Tawheed, which has been summarized here from the earlier theme of Surah Yasin. But then going back to the Prophet, Rasulullah, after all, he was a human being. Yes, he was a Masoom, he was a Nabi, but it's not that he didn't feel thirsty or hungry, or he was not hurt physically if somebody, attacked him, or even emotionally if somebody said wrong things to him. And so this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet now, that فَلَا يَحْزُنُكَ قَوْلُهُمْ إِنَّ نَعْلَمَ مَا يُسِرُّونَ وَمَا يُعْلِنُونَ. Therefore, let not their speech grieve you, O Muhammad. Surely we know what they conceal and what they display. This is basically going back to the levels that we talked about earlier. Calling him Majnoon, while they knew him from childhood, that he is not Majnoon. Calling him Sha'ir, although he had never composed poetry even before Bi'sat. This is interesting. It's not that, only after he started talking about Islam that he stopped. Even before that, there is not a single line of poetry from Rasulullah. And then they started calling him Sahir. So yes, even I said earlier, we shouldn't be afraid of the labels that we use, but we feel hurt. When others say we are terrorists, or we are fundamentalists, or we are radicals, and we are this and that, we say, you are wrong. You are ignorant. You don't know. You are racist and this and that. This is how we respond. But look inside, yes, you feel the hurt. You are hurt. And this is where Rasulullah, he knows he is not Majnoon, alhamdulillah. He is not Sha'ir. He is not Sahir. But when people say that, of course, and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا يَحْذُنُكَ قَوْلُهُمْ. Don't let their words against you grieve you. And so this is a consolation to Rasulullah. Why? Because Allah knows what is in their heart. Sometimes these disbelievers, the mushrikeen, would display their hatred through these words. But there are others who don't do that. And Allah says, I know all of them. Those who display and those who don't display. In both cases, so you don't have to worry about it. Now we come to the third theme of the surah, and that is Qiyamah. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the summary also is going back to the third theme there, where he says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَ الْإِنسَانِ أَنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُ مِن نُطْفَةٍ فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. Does not the human being see that we have created him from a simple sperm drop? فَإِذَا هُوَ خَصِيمٌ مُبِينٌ. Yet he is, an open challenger. He is challenging me on the issue of Qiyamah. وَضَرَبَ لَنَا مَثَلًا وَنَسِيَ خَلْقَهُ. He is giving me an example. And he forgets his own creation. That what was his beginning. قَالَ. And then he turns to me and he says, مَنْ يُحْيِي الْعِظَامَ وَهِيَ رَمِيمٌ. Who is going to resurrect the bones once they turn into dust? This is how, they used to, the mushrikeen of Mecca would respond to the issue of Qiyamah. And so this is what I'm saying, that in the summary of Surah Yasin, now Allah is coming to the summary of the third theme, which is about resurrection and Qiyamah. And, in a way, even our own Khaliq is amazed of his makhluk. He says, look at this human being. I created him from one drop, and he's being so arrogant. He's forgetting his own origin. And he's telling me that, who is going to revive these bones again after they have decayed and turned into dust. This is what the mushrikeen used to say, that, they believed in idols. They believed in one God in a way, but they still used to worship idols, and that is the meaning of shirk. But they had no concept of Qiyamah and Ma'ad. That was the main thing that they opposed Rasulullah on this issue. And so the response comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah says, قُلْ يُحْيِيهَا الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الشَّجَرِ الْأَخْضَرِ نَارًا فَإِذَا أَنْتُم مِّنْهُ تُوقِدُونَ. Say the bones will be resurrected by one who brought them into existence, and he is well aware of all creation. The one who has made for you the fire from the green tree, with it you kindle the fire. Now in response to, when they said, when the idham will turn into ramim, who is going to resurrect these bones which turn into dust? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives two answers. Where He says, قُلْ يُحْيِيهَا. These bones that you say they turn into dust, it will be revived. By whom? Two answers are there. One is, الَّذِي أَنْشَأَهَا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ. The one who created you, from the earth, from the clay. For Him to recreate you is easier. And not only that, He's not like some of the manufacturers who might invent something, then they don't know about it anymore. No, He knows everything from beginning to the end. And that is the issue. وَهُوَ بِكُلِّ خَلْقٍ عَلِيمٌ. He is aware of everything at every stage of existence. And the second answer is الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُم مِّنَ الشَّجَرِ الْأَخْضَرِ. This is an example which was relevant and understandable by the people of Mecca. It seems there was a tree. Normally, the trees, when the branches become dry, and if you rub them with one another, you get this friction, and then you get this spark, and you can have fire. But for that, you need two branches which are totally dry. Look at this fire in Alberta or California. How does it happen? Other than when it happened by arson from human beings, but when it happens by itself, many times it is, these branches, because of the summer, they become very dry, and the wind comes in, and when the branches rub on one another, this is where the fire comes in. So the normal fire will come from the tree or the branches which are dry. Whereas green means which is fresh, and in a way wet relatively, you will not get the spark. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you are surprised that I will resurrect you, revive you after your bones have decayed. For you, this is unusual. He says you don't have to go far. Normally, dry branches are the ones which are used for creating fire. But I have given you a shajar, which is akhbar, green, and you use that and you still get fire. So this is unusual. But you have example around yourself of things which are unusual, and so it might be unusual for you, but this is what I can do as far as Qiyamah is concerned. And that's where he emphasized the point. أَوَلَيْسَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بِقَادِرٍ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَخْلُقُ مِثْلَهُمْ بَلَى وَهُوَ الْخَلَّاقُ الْعَلِيمُ. That he who created the heavens and the earth, isn't he capable of creating the like of them? Yes, he is the creator and the knower. That was Khalqin Alim, and this is Al-Khallaqul Alim. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes this point. And then he says, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَنْ يَقُولَ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونُ. That, his command, whenever he intends to do anything, is only to say to it, be, kun, and it happens. And so for him, the Qiyamah is not really an issue of difficulty. You find it difficult, but for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to recreate human beings is not a problem. Now sometimes the discussion is there, the word mithluhum, like them. It means not exactly the same. Well, there are all different meanings here. You don't have to necessarily go to the literal meaning that, it's not the real, resurrection of the same person. No, it is. The only point is that, a human being is born, infant, and a child, a youth, a young man, finally becoming adult and old. The resurrection will happen how? At all stages of your life? Or one stage of your life? We will be brought at the prime age of normal human beings. And so this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, probably is referring to when he uses the word mathal there. Now the last ayat here is very interesting, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, talks about it, and uses the term إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يكون له كن فيكون. If you look at the literal meaning of the ayat, it says that whenever Allah intends to do something, إذا أراد. So first you have irada. This is where, he says يقول له kun. He says kun to it. Then he says, and then it happens. If you look at the literal meaning of the ayat here, there are three stages. First, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans. And once he has done the irada, then he says kun. And when he has said kun, then it happens. Is this how it happens? Is Allah like us? Sitting and first thinking about it and then planning, and then he says, okay, I want to do this. And therefore he says, now I'm saying kun, and then it happens. So there are three stages there. From the, thinking about it, intending about it, saying the command of kun, and then it happening. No. This is actually because of our own limitation. We cannot really comprehend the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is coming down to our level and talking to us, just to make it easy for us to absorb His power. Otherwise, we don't have the ability. Amir al-Mu'mineen says Allah doesn't speak. Allah is the creator of the speech. He doesn't say kun like we say kun. He is the creator of the speech. And the issue is that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His irada is actually realization of the reality. When He does the irada, it happens. He doesn't have to do irada and then He says kun and then it, all this here in this ayat is just to, as if to say things to us gradually, because we will not be able to, digest the reality. Let me give you an example from, in the process of ijtihad, there are some discussions very interesting can be used here. There are two words used in usul al-fiqh. One is known as taqaddum, other is known as ta'akhur. Taqaddum means something which comes first. Ta'akhur means something which comes later on. And this is where you see, taqaddum and ta'akhur. This thing came first, and this thing came second. Now, when we talk about taqaddum and ta'akhur, there is one dimension of taqaddum and ta'akhur which is time related. We said A happened, and then this was followed by B. So A came first, and B followed it. So this is muqaddam and this is muakhar. But then when we talk about taqaddum and ta'akhur, there is another dimension of that. And that is not related to zaman. It is not taqaddum or ta'akhur zamani. It is actually taqaddum and ta'akhur rutbi. It is not a time issue that first came and the second came. It's just that the first is of a higher level than the second. It is the level of, the level or the status are different. I'll give you one example. When you want to open your front door, what do? You put the key in there, or just you hold the handle with your hand, and then you turn. And the door will open. In that process, when your hand turned the knob or the key, we can think of taqaddum and ta'akhur. Your hand was muqaddam and the key or the knob is muakhar. Not time-wise. When your hand turned, the knob also turned at the same time. But your hand is the cause. And the knob or the key is the object or the effect. And so this is more important than the knob. And so it's happening at the same time, but this is more, important than the knob of the door or the key. So this is muqaddam, this is muakhar. When we say here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying arada, and then He says yaqulu lahu kun, this is not taqaddum and ta'akhur zamani. It's not that first He did irada and then He said kun and then it happened. When He does irada, it happens right away. Because when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends to do something on the level of takhliq, there is no power which can be a barrier between the irada of Allah and the murad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, this is where you understand the glory of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the summary as well as the surah ends very beautifully with the words, فَسُبْحَانَ الَّذِي بَيَدِهِ مَلَكُوتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. So glory be to Him in whose hand is the kingdom of all things, and to Him you shall be returned. Salawat Mandek. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity to go through this brief summary of Surah Yasin, which is a surah that we recite all the time. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give us that tawfiq to gain from the nur of this qalb al-Quran, which is the heart of the Quran itself. Salawat pande ek baar. چونکہ آج کا یہ پروگرام مجلس کے عنوان سے بھی ہے تو بہت ہی مختصراً یہی جو آخری آیت تھی جس میں خداوند عالم کے ارادے کی بات ہوئی تھی، وَإِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أَنْ يَقُولَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ پہ ہی ہم ایک تبصرہ کرنا چاہیں گے کہ خداوند عالم نے مختلف ارادے کیے ہیں، ایک تشریعی لیول پر ہے اور ایک تخلیقی لیول پہ ہے۔ جہاں تک تشریعی لیول پہ ہے، خدا کا ارادہ یہ ہوتا ہے کہ خدا کہتا ہے ہم فورس نہیں کریں گے، ہم چاہتے ہیں کہ تم اپنے اختیار سے یہ کرو۔ یہ نہیں ہے کہ خداوند عالم کی قدرت وہاں کم ہے یا دی پاور از لمیٹڈ، نو، خدا یہ چاہتا ہے کہ انسان خود اپنے ارادے سے وہ کام کرے جو خدا چاہتا ہے۔ لیکن جب تخلیقی لیول کی بات آتی ہے، وہاں اگر خداوند عالم ارادے کی بات کرتا ہے تو وہ انسان کے ارادے پہ ڈیپینڈ نہیں کرتا ہے۔ اگر خداوند عالم یہ کہے کہ انما یرید اللہ، کہ یقیناً خداوند عالم نے ارادہ کیا لیذہب عنکم الرجس اہل البیت، کہ اہل بیت آپ سے تمام رجس اور گندگی اور آلودگی کو دور رکھے گا، تو مرید خداوند عالم ہے، ارادہ جو ہے طہارت ہے، اور یہاں پر مراد جو ہے طہارت اہل بیت ہے۔ اگر مرید اتنا پاورفل ہو اور مراد بھی اس کے پاس وہ ظرفیت ہو تو بیچ میں کوئی حائل نہیں ہو سکتا ہے۔ دنیا نے پوری کوشش کی ہے اہل بیت کے مرتبے کو گرانے کی، لیکن تمام کوششوں کے باوجود یہ ہمیشہ ناکام رہے ہیں۔ اور اس میں احسان شیعوں کا نہیں ہے۔ کبھی کبھی ہم لوگ سمجھتے ہیں کہ بھائی ہم لوگوں نے بہت کچھ کیا ہے، وہ ہم لوگوں نے کچھ نہیں کیا ہے، وہ خداوند عالم کا ارادہ ہے۔ اور جب خداوند عالم کا ارادہ ہو تو پھر وہاں کوئی بھی اللہ کے اس ارادے میں مانع نہیں ہو سکتا ہے۔ امام حسین علیہ السلام کے بارے میں اگر آپ دیکھیں، وہاں بھی ارادہ الہی کیا ہے، مشیت الہی کیا ہے؟ مشیت الہی یہ نہیں ہے کہ حسین کو قتل کیا جائے، مشیت ارادہ الہی یہ ہے کہ مسلمانوں کو کہا گیا ہے، حکم دیا جا رہا ہے، اختیار ان کو دیا جا رہا ہے کہ تم اپنے ارادے سے اہل بیت سے محبت کرو۔ لیکن اس کا مطلب یہ نہیں ہے کہ مثلا اگر یزید نے امام حسین علیہ السلام کو قتل کر دیا تو خدا نے یہ ارادہ کیا تھا، نہیں، قطعاً نہیں۔ امام حسین علیہ السلام کو یہ ذمہ داری دی گئی ہے کہ آپ کو اسلام کو بچانا ہے، اور اگر بچانے میں آپ کو قربانی بھی دینی پڑے تو آپ کو تیار ہونا چاہیے۔ وہ مشیت الہی ہے اس طرف سے۔ دوسری طرف سے یزید سے کہا جا رہا ہے کہ خدا یہ نہیں چاہتا ہے کہ تم حسین کو قتل کرو، اور تم اگر حسین کو قتل کرو گے تو تم قیامت کے دن ہمارے سامنے آؤ گے اور ہم تم سے سوال کریں گے اس سلسلے میں۔ تو مشیت الہی جو ہے، جہاں تک انسان کی عمل کی بات ہے، وہ ڈیپینڈ کرتا ہے انسان کے عمل پہ۔ خداوند عالم وہاں بھی دیکھ رہا ہے کہ حسین کیا کرنے والے ہیں۔ حسین کو خداوند عالم نے وہاں ایز اے روبوٹ یا مجبور نہیں پیدا کیا ہے۔ کہا گیا ہے کہ حسین آپ کے سامنے بیعت کا سوال ہوگا، دو چوائسز دیے جائیں گے، یا تو ایک صوبائی حکومت اور دولت اور دنیاوی جاہ و مقام اور حیثیت، اور دوسری طرف جو ہے آپ کو مخالفت کرنی ہے۔ مخالفت کرنے میں آپ کو قتل بھی کر دیا جائے تو خدا کہتا ہے کہ ہماری مشیت یہ ہے کہ آپ مخالفت کو اپنائیں۔ لیکن یہ نہیں ہے کہ حسین کو خداوند عالم نے مجبور کر دیا تھا، ورنہ پھر اس قربانی کی اہمیت نہیں ہوگی۔ یزید کو بھی خداوند عالم یہی کہتا ہے کہ تمہارا فریضہ یہ ہے کہ تم سید شباب اہل جنہ سے محبت کرو، اور اگر تم نے مخالفت کی اور انہیں قتل کیا تو تم جہنم میں جاؤ گے۔ تو یہ ہے مشیت الہی، اور یہی ارادے الہی کے دو الگ الگ لیول ہیں، ایک تشریع کا مرحلہ ہے اور ایک تخلیق کا مرحلہ ہے۔ صلوات پڑھنے ایک بار اور۔ عاشور کے دن صرف ہم ایک مثال دینا چاہیں گے کہ کس طرح سے طاقت ہوتے ہوئے، جس طرح سے خداوند عالم طاقت رکھتے ہوئے بھی حالات کو اسی طرح سے ہونے دے رہا ہے جو نیچرل سیکوینس ہیں انسان کے اپنے اختیار کی بنیاد پر، اس لیے کہ اس کے سامنے قیامت کا دن ہے کہ اس دن ہم ان سے سوال کریں گے اور ان کو جزا یا سزا ملے گی۔ امام حسین علیہ السلام کو خداوند عالم نے جو صلاحیتیں دی تھیں، معجزے کی طاقت دی تھی، علم غیب کا سلسلہ ہے، یہ سب جو ہے اپنی جگہ پہ ہے، لیکن حسین کا کمال یہی ہے کہ خداوند عالم نے کہا ہے کہ حسین ہم نے تم کو وہ ولایت دی ہے جو ولایت تامہ اور کاملہ ہے پوری کائنات پر۔ اگر حسین چاہتے تو نہر علقمہ کو خیمے تک لا سکتے تھے، جائے بغیر اشارہ کرتے اور نہر جو ہے وہاں تک پہنچ جاتی، لیکن حسین جانتے تھے کہ خدا کی مشیت یہ نہیں ہے۔ خدا نے طاقت ضرور دی ہے لیکن ایک قید لگائی ہے کہ حسین آپ اپنی طاقت کو، معجزے کی اس طاقت کو استعمال کریں گے صرف اپنے حقانیت کو ثابت کرنے کے لیے، اپنے ذات کے لیے نہیں، اپنی اولاد کے لیے نہیں۔ آپ سوچ لیں امام حسین علیہ السلام کے لیے کتنا مشکل مرحلہ تھا عاشور کے دن۔ حسین کے لیے ہر مرحلہ مشکل تھا، لیکن وہ جوان بیٹا جو مقابلے میں فتح حاصل کرنے کے بعد لوٹ کے آتا ہے، وہ بیٹا جو صورت میں اور آواز میں اور کردار میں رسول کی شبیہ تھا، وہ بیٹا جس کے بارے میں خود حسین رخصت کرتے ہوئے کہتے ہیں خداوندہ تو گواہ رہنا، میرا وہ بیٹا جا رہا ہے کہ جو میرے نانا سے شبیہ تھا، جب بھی مجھے خواہش ہوتی تھی نانا کی زیارت کریں تو ہم اپنے بیٹے کی طرف دیکھتے تھے۔ اتنا عظیم بیٹا ہو اور وہ مقابلہ جیتنے کے بعد آتا ہے، بابا سے صرف انعام میں کیا کہا ہے؟ یا ابتا العطش قد قتلنی وثقل الحدید جد اجحدنی، کہ بابا پیاس نے مجھے قتل کر دیا ہے، اسلحے کی سنگینی نے مجھے تھکا دیا ہے، کیا کوئی سبیل ہے کہ پانی کا ایک قطرہ مل سکے؟ حسین کا امتحان اس وقت کا ہے کہ خداوند عالم نے ولایت تکویری دی ہوئی ہے، اگر چاہتے تو نہر علقمہ کو اپنی طرف بلا سکتے تھے، لیکن مشکل مرحلہ میں بھی حسین نے یہ نہیں کیا، بلکہ اپنی زبان دے دیتے ہیں بیٹے کو ان کے دہن میں، تاکہ بیٹے کو احساس ہو کہ بابا نے پانی تو تمام لوگوں سے پہلے چھوڑ دیا تھا، بابا کی زبان زیادہ خشک ہے بیٹا، اور اکبر کو احساس ہو گیا اور وہ چلے جاتے ہیں۔ لیکن یہ خلق عظیم کی مثال تھی کہ اکبر کو جب سینے میں وہ انی لگی ہے اور گھوڑے سے جب زمین پہ آئے ہیں، آپ اس منظر کے بارے میں سوچیں کہ جہاں سینے میں نیزہ لگا ہوا ہو، انسان اس وقت بول نہیں سکتا ہے، لیکن بلند آواز میں اکبر نے ایک جملہ کہا تھا، بابا کو مدد کے لیے نہیں پکارا، صرف کہا تھا کہ بابا آپ پر آخری سلام ہو۔ اس کے بعد ایک جملہ کہتے ہیں بابا میرے جد آ چکے ہیں، انہوں نے مجھے سیراب کر دیا ہے، آپ کا بیٹا پیاسا نہیں۔ یہ اکبر نے اس لیے کہا تھا کہ جاتے وقت بابا کے چہرے پر جو کرب اور اذیت کے آثار تھے کہ بیٹے نے پانی مانگا لیکن پانی کا ایک قطرہ بھی ہم نے نہ دے سکے، بابا کے دل کو مطمئن کرنے کے لیے اکبر نے اس حالت میں بھی بابا سے کہا کہ بابا غم نہ کرے، آپ کا بیٹا پیاسا نہیں۔ الا لعنت اللہ علی القوم الظالمین سیعلم الذین ظلموا ای منقلب ینقلبون۔ خداوند اس کے لیے بات قبول فرما، ہمارے گناہوں کو بخش دے، ہماری توفیقات میں اضافہ فرما۔ خداوندہ جن مرحومین کے ایصال ثواب کے لیے مجلس ہے، اس ذکر قرآن اور ذکر اہل بیت کا اجر و ثواب ان کے روح اور قبر تک پہنچا، ان کو محمد آل محمد کے ساتھ محشور فرمانا، ان کے گناہوں کو معاف فرما۔ خداوندہ مسلمان خصوصاً شیعہ علی جہاں جہاں پریشان حال ہیں ان کو اپنے حفظ امان میں رکھ، تکفیری افواج کو نیست و نابود فرما، امام کے ظہور میں تعجیل فرما۔ ربنا تقبل منک انک انت السمیع العلیم۔ صلوات پڑھنے پر